You know, sometimes in life we make poor decisions, but today is not one of those days. Today's going to be a good day. We're going to be building a 7,000-piece Pokemon Lego set. My largest project yet, and definitely uncharted territory. Everything is organized into 3 separate Pokeboxes, one for each Pokemon. To say that I was overwhelmed is accurate. It was at this point I quickly realized that dumping all the bags on the table was a terrible choice. But that's okay, that's why we're here. We're in this journey together, and we're going to tackle one Pokemon at a time. If you were born after the invention of the internet, let me tell you, this is what Pokemon used to look like. And I know what you're thinking. The realism is pretty overwhelming. Today you're going to see a lot of interesting textures and techniques with the terrain, along with some colorful characters with each Pokemon build. But let's not get ahead of ourselves and dive into the first Pokemon habitat. We're going to build this for display, so we need to have a very strong foundation. And while thinking about foundations, it made me wonder why we get to choose from 3 different Pokemon as our starters. Pokemon has always had 3 starters, and in this case we have fire, water, and grass. And that's because the original designer modeled them after rock, paper, and scissors. Every choice counters one and loses to another. Some people will tell you that there's no wrong Pokemon to choose from, and those people picked Bulbasaur as their trusty companion. And they've been trying to justify their decision for over 30 years. And that's okay. Since we are starting with a grass Pokemon, it only makes sense to work on the foliage. And we've got a nice selection of colors here with this lavender and burnt orange combo. It surprisingly does give the scenery a bit more depth and a bit more of a relaxing atmosphere. It should help our Pokemon feel cozy and right at home. As we add the larger bits of the foliage for Venusaur's habitat, I'd like to thank my Patreon members and share something you may not know about the original Pokemon games. You might think that Pikachu was the first Pokemon that was ever designed, and that is actually not correct. The first Pokemon designed was Rhydon, which makes me sad because I think that a few of you may not even know who he is. So shout out to our friend Rhydon. We have a habitat, and now we need a Pokemon. Sometimes you build these and you find interesting Easter eggs, and in this case, it looks like we have something for our grass Pokemon here. If you've never built a character Lego design before, they're quite interesting. You'll see a lot of strange patterns and pieces, but it all starts to come together as you build these larger sections and the character's curvature starts to take shape. And I mean that literally. Right now, this looks like someone handed me a bag of random pieces and said, "Best of luck." There's no moment yet where you can look at this and say, yes, that's clearly a Pokemon. But that's kind of the thing with character builds. You're not building a shape, you're building a formula. And at some point, the formula comes together. We're not there yet, but we're getting there. It does bring a certain level of curiosity, because I don't even know what I'm looking at here myself, but the instructions have not failed me so far, and we press on. Now this is where it starts to get interesting. The legs and feet on a character build like this are doing a lot more work than they might look like. These larger structural pieces are thinking about the weight distribution of the entire model, because Venusaur is not a small Pokemon. He's a very big, heavy, four-legged creature, and we need to account for that. You might also say that he's rather bulbous. Bulbasaurus, if you will. We are going to be posing him inside of his habitat shortly, so he needs to be able to stand on his own without any support. He'll have a little adjustability and some flexibility when we place him in the uneven terrain, but it's details like this that you don't usually think about, and it's the kind of thing that makes a difference between a model that sits perfectly and one that leans slightly left forever. And now we're moving on to the headpiece, which at this stage looks about as recognizable as the torso when we first started. He has a multicolored inner structure going on, a lot of exposed studs, pieces that are clearly there for function and not for looks. But this needs to be exactly right because everything that comes after this is built on top of it. And if it's off everywhere. Moving on to the jaw piece, this is where Venusaur starts to get some personality. The curvature of his jaw pieces was also pretty fascinating. But I will say that putting together a Lego tongue is kind of odd, but strangely satisfying. It does add a lot to his expressive face. But it is kind of weird. Venusaur is looking very unfinished, but once these go on, even more of his character starts to come through. He has these big rounded pieces for his ears that sit wide on either side of his head. It's a small detail that adds a lot. And he might look like a Cyclops, but he's still a friend in our hearts. As we move on, piece by piece, he starts to develop his face. We put his nose on, and the eyes go on afterwards. And somewhere in there is a grass-type Pokemon I've never chosen before. This right here was a big moment because I realized that we have 30 years of nostalgia just sitting here on the table. And quite honestly, that's pretty cool. Moving on to what is genuinely one of the most iconic parts of Venusaur's design, the plant on his back. And what I love about this is it's not only a design choice, there's a story told across 3 evolutions. His first form as Bulbasaur starts with a seed. It's just a small bulb, nothing more. And as he evolves into Ivysaur, that seed starts to sprout and open up. And by the time you reach Venusaur, it's a fully bloomed flower. The plant literally grows with the Pokemon. It's one of those things that you may not have noticed growing up with these games, but it's always been there. And now you'll always notice it. As we put on these vibrant colors onto this pink hexagon, you start to appreciate just how loud and vibrant they are. This is an iconic design after all, and it's also one of the most satisfying moments of this build. Along with placing the stem into place, it just feels good. And I'm glad that our little Pokemon friend doesn't look like a frog anymore, but we do have quite a bit of work left to make him fully complete. These antenna-like pieces that he uses for some of his attacks have a really distinct wavy pattern to them. And it's one of those details that will really pull out the look of Venusaur. Like, there's no guessing here. And the leaves are interesting too because they're not completely flat. There's a bend built into each one. so they have this natural curve that gives the whole plant some depth and movement. And once all 4 of the big leaves go on top, the plant starts to feel like it belongs and like it was always supposed to look like this. It truly is an iconic design. There's no doubt about that. And just when you think he's done, there's even more. We have these pink leaves that add on top, and we're not holding back on the color here. I think this was the right call. It's another aspect of Venusaur's personality. And it also shows that the original designers had a much larger vision than what was capable in the 90s. It probably also helped that they had an anime cartoon to help bring out these vibrant characters. Pokemon wouldn't be what it is today without that show. We have a couple of pegs and holes to place Venusaur into his habitat, and I think this is the moment where it all pays off. Venusaur is finally done, and we have 2 more to go. Up next we have Blastoise, and his habitat is a completely different challenge from Venusaur's. Where that one was all about building something that felt alive and organic, this one is all about capturing water. And that's a lot harder to pull off in plastic. But these little wave pieces are doing something really clever. Mixing in the curvature of the larger waves along with these translucent blue pieces that start to layer in give us a sense of movement. The ripples actually look like ripples. It's one of those things where you're not sure it's going to work when you're building it, and as we see it, it just does. If you look through Blastoise's description, it describes him as a symbol of power and defense, capable of firing water at enough pressure to punch through solid steel. And it also notes that he deliberately knocks his enemies off their feet before finishing them off. And that's crazy because he's a turtle. No one has ever questioned any of this. Once these side pieces start to come together, you get a sense of the scale of this thing. The color mix of these pieces gives the water kind of like a lighter, almost airy quality to it, like it's catching it in mid-motion. And then we add these long curved pieces along the top and fan them out. And this is where it starts to look like actual waves frozen in place. That detail alone makes this habitat. To finish off the habitat, we're going to add these large platforms, which are big, solid, and exactly where they need to be. We've gone from a flat base to something that actually looks like Blastoise's world. And now we just need Blastoise. Every time I pick a Pokemon starter, I always ignore the water one. Every single time I see the water option, I acknowledge that it's probably the most practical choice, and then I pick something else. Usually I go with fire for some reason. Honestly, I don't know why. And it's interesting because the water Pokemon are the most common type of all choices. And I'm not a Pokemon connoisseur by any means, but from my limited research, more water Pokemon exist than any other type by a significant margin. And Blastoise, to his credit, has always remained one of the most recognized Pokemon in the entire franchise for many decades. so maybe everyone was onto something. But even though I know that, I'll still pick Charmander. The torso build for Blastoise is mechanical in a way that Venusaur's never was. We have more hinges and joints, and it feels like we're building something that should move. It's almost like you're assembling a puppet. You're laying out all the internal structure before any of the personality shows up on the outside. And for the record, I've never built a puppet. They kinda creep me out. When we start layering on the front part of his shell, it really comes together. It's when you start to recognize him. And next we put on these arm rods, which are genuinely strange looking on their own. But his arms will start to take shape here shortly, so you just kind of have to trust the process. It is interesting how mechanical these builds can be. And I wasn't expecting to feel this way when I started this build, but I wouldn't mind building a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle. The arms build out in these layered segments, and we have a progression of colors going outward. And they slot into those rods that we put in earlier. It's a satisfying assembly. At this stage, each piece has a clear purpose, and once the hands attach and the full arms go on, the whole upper body of Blastoise just locks into place. Our little water Pokemon friend is starting to look like he means business. Before we move on to the feet, we do have to finish the top portion of his shell, which we'll get back to here in a second. These claws are one of my favorite details in the entire build. There's something about them that just makes him look like he's larger than life. I mean, granted, Blastoise is a big, heavy four-legged creature, and the feet really have to sell that. And I think they do. This definitely feels right. The tail portion is a quick build. It's simple, but it finishes off the back end of him very nicely. But I will say that of all the angles I imagined filming this build from, this was not the one that I had in mind. The shell pieces go on in different sections, and they do change the entire look of them. The larger segments have kind of like a hidden structure underneath that you would never notice that was there once it's covered, but it does matter. It's going to allow us to slide this in at a certain angle to complete the entire shell. The cannons are no doubt Blastoise's signature look, so we need to make sure that these look perfect. And that's where the transparent piece at the end just brings everything together. And once this goes on his back, you kind of stop thinking about all the individual pieces up to this point, and you just see Blastoise. Assembling his head is where he really starts to come alive. That look of confidence in his expression feels very on brand for him. This nose piece is very specific to Blastoise. You just can't mistake it. And moving on to his mouth with the teeth curving outward and that little red tongue right in the middle, it's a straightforward design, but it's still completely him. But something wasn't sitting quite right here, and off camera I had to make a small adjustment to the depth of his head. Which happens sometimes. The instructions aren't wrong, sometimes you just have to go back a step to go forward, and it's all good now. You know, Blastoise is one of those Pokemon that has always just kind of been around. He doesn't need a big introduction or a comeback moment. He's just been consistently here since the beginning, and everyone knows who he is. He's one of those timeless Pokemon, and I think a lot of us have a soft spot for him. I mean, how could you not? Just look at him. I didn't expect to do any dental work at this stage of the build, but once that was sorted, he goes right onto his habitat, and that's it. Blastoise is done. That's 2 Pokemon down and 1 to go. Compared to the others, Charizard's habitat starts completely different. This is going to have more of a vertical structure to it, and that means that the foundation has to be strong enough to hold everything up. And at this point, it's all just internal structure and a lot of Technic pieces, nothing really pretty to look at yet. But this is what makes the whole thing possible. Here's the thing about Charizard. He's one of those characters that everybody just knows. You don't even need to be a Pokemon fan or even have played the games. For the most part, you could just show a picture of Charizard to pretty much anyone and they would recognize him. That doesn't happen with most characters from a video game. When I did a little bit of my Pokemon research prior to this build, I found that the Pokemon Company actually ran a poll to find out who the most popular Pokemon was. And what was actually kind of mind-blowing, Charizard finished ahead of Pikachu, who happens to be the mascot of the entire franchise. And I think that says pretty much everything. Our habitat is starting to look like something here. These side plates are really something. You've got this bright orange lava running down through the rocky terrain. The way the colors layer together give it this really nice sense of depth and dimension. It's also covering up all of that internal structure that we built earlier, and so you would never know it was even there. It always amazes me how adding a little bit of texture can make these plastic pieces feel like an environment. As we continue to put these side plates on piece by piece, the habitat is finally done. Our buddy Charizard is going to have somewhere that he can call home. I really hope he's a fan of lava. That wouldn't be my first choice. I'm just saying. Moving on to Charizard himself, I'm personally invested in this. I've always been drawn to the fire starter, and it'll always be my first choice. There's something about it I've never been able to talk myself out of, and I think a few of you may be able to resonate with that. I think this is something that we can all agree on. Charizard looks exactly like a dragon. He has wings, he breathes fire, and he has other dragon-like qualities, just like a dragon would. And for decades, people have called him a dragon. But technically, he's not a dragon. He's a fire and flying type of Pokemon. The people responsible for designing him knew this and put him in a game anyway, and have never addressed it once. Technically speaking, his fire can reportedly melt boulders, but according to his official description, he'll never use it on a weaker opponent. And that's because he has a personal code of ethics, and I'm not making this up. But he did also start multiple forest fires, so the code of ethics has some gaps. The legs on this build are doing something specific because he's not going to be standing on the ground, he's going to be flying posed midair above his habitat. These legs aren't built for weight distribution the way Venusaur's were, they're built for the pose and for a sense of motion. At the same time, he does need to still be able to stand on a table without any support. So there's a balance here of having him look like he's in flight and actually being able to hold himself up. The tail is built into segments so it can be posed once everything is together, which is important for a Pokémon that's going to be up in the air. It also needs a healthy level of flexibility. And of course, then the fire goes on at the end. The fire on Charizard's tail never goes out. It's been burning since the day he was born. And no one has ever looked at this and suggested that it might be a problem. I certainly don't want him roaming around my house. The wings are a build where you can feel it coming together as you go. The outer skeleton has a satisfying shape to it. Even before anything is filled in, the wingspan is already impressive. It has these lines on the teal portion that give the whole wing an illustrated quality, almost like something lifted straight out of an anime. I've got to say, it's a faithful translation of the original design, and one of the more beautiful parts of the build. Charizard can pretty much fly anywhere he wants, melt boulders with his breath, and has been the most feared Pokémon in the room for 30 years. And then you build his arms. These tiny, little, almost apologetic arms. This is not something that Charizard is interested in discussing. So we'll leave it at that. This neck piece was not something I expected to be building, and I didn't realize that Charizard had a neck quite like this until I was holding it. I mean, it makes sense to me now. He would definitely look pretty weird without it. And then the head starts to come together. The teeth go on first, and then the nose, and the expression starts to form. The ears and jaw, which are other signature qualities, go on after that, and that's when his whole design starts to come together, which feels great after such a long journey. I have to say, this whole build has been something else. Each one of these Pokémon has its own world and its own feel, and getting to spend time with all three of them back to back has genuinely been special. These are characters that a lot of us grew up with, and seeing them like this, it just hits different than a normal build. I do think that this is something that I'll remember for a long time. And up he goes, right where he belongs, above everything. Looking exactly like he should. And as we put all three on the table, I realized that the budgets were well spent and that this one was indeed perfect. Thanks again to my Patreon members for supporting builds like this. I hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, I'll catch you in the next one.